Welcome everyone to the International Students Pika series. My name is Nasif. I'm one of the SAESAC graduate student members.
My name is Cayetana, and I'm also one of the SAESAC members.
My name is Kira, and I'm also a member of SAESAC, and we're all international students. So basically, the main goal for this panel is to invite professionals who are also international students, because we know how, it's not a very straightforward path for us to get into the industry. So we just want to help other students to kind of get some inspiration from people who already have a job in the aerospace industry in the United States, and kind of have some guidance from them.
Yeah, basically we want to show that it's not impossible. It is hard, but it's not impossible. There are ways to get through that. So with that, this is, I don't know what speaker number we have. We had a bunch of previous speakers, and you can find their videos on our website, on the AE.tech website. But today we have Ricardo Saborio. He is one of my friends when he was at Georgia Tech. So he is a flight test engineer at Pyka. It is a farming drone company in California, San Francisco, California. He got his bachelor's in aerospace engineering from University of Minnesota in 2019, and a master's in aerospace as well from Georgia Tech in 2021. In undergrad, he worked on 2 CubeSat projects called Exact and Socrates that studied GPS-denied navigation through pulsars and coronal mass ejections from the sun. So I guess 2 different CubeSats for 2 different purposes. So for those projects in undergrad, he was the command and data handling lead. And after he came here to Georgia Tech, they actually launched the ISS and Antares rocket, and they got deployed from the ISS in, I think, late December 2019 or Jan 2020. At Georgia Tech, he worked on the GT1 CubeSat. So this is a 1U CubeSat that was developed by the SSDL. It launched in December in a Falcon 9 rocket and got deployed by ISS on early Feb. So he worked on the OpenLSD radio platform. So this is an open source platform from Planet Labs. So Ricardo worked on modifying the firmware for this project. He'll talk more about it. He worked on modifying the firmware for use for the GT1 application as well as the future iterations of the GT project. So with that, I'd like to introduce Ricardo Saborio. And yeah, go Ricardo. You can go ahead and introduce anything else.
Hi. No, thank you for that. I'm very happy to be here. Let's see, I should probably share my screen. You guys will have to bear with me because this is the first time I've done something like this. So it's going to be extremely clunky. Can you guys see my screen?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, sweet, perfect. So I will move this here. Okay, so I guess the idea I had for this presentation was, as Nasif said, just kind of have a rough overview of how I was able to kind of navigate the aerospace industry as an international student. I'm sure most of you are aware of how difficult and frustrating it can be at times. So this is just going to be an example of a path you can take. There is a very big chance that what worked for me will not necessarily work for you, but hopefully this helps us providing a rough idea of things you could do. So yeah, just with that we can start. So there we go. Okay, so a little bit about myself. I was born and raised in San Jose, Costa Rica. I've always been passionate about aerospace. I wanted to be a pilot for the longest time, and with that I ended up moving to the United States for my undergrad. Kind of the pilot dreams went away, but I still had a passion for aerospace engineering. So I decided to get my bachelor's in aerospace engineering at the University of Minnesota. And then I eventually moved on to a master's at Georgia Tech. And I currently work as a flight test engineer at Pyka. So yeah, as I mentioned, kind of my goal with this presentation is just provide think of all the things Ricardo wished he knew before choosing a career in aerospace. And then I'll also just kind of sprinkle in some tips and tricks for interviews, job hunting, and how to stand out in job and grad school applications. So before we get to that, I'll give a brief overview kind of of my company and what does my position entail. So Pyka is an agricultural drone company. We focus on making fixed wing crop dusters that are electric. It was founded in 2017 and we're roughly 25 employees at the moment. So for those of you who are not aware, crop dusters are essentially agriculture airplanes that are used for aerial application of pesticides, fungicides, And they, so they're using a variety of crops. The company was created with the idea that the technology for electric aircraft is not really there yet. Batteries are still way too heavy and not as efficient as we would want them to be. But it turns out that the case for an electric crop duster is actually pretty good. You only really need enough battery life for as long as your tank lasts. So that means that you can have pretty short missions and quick turnaround. So there's that. There's also a case for having an autonomous crop duster, so you can actually spray at night and increase productivity, which is very useful in crops like bananas. And there's also a significant cost reduction. Crop dusters are pretty expensive to run. I think an air tractor, which is the one you can see on the left, costs around $500 an hour in maintenance. So having an electric aircraft actually reduces the cost by a lot. And it's also a very risky operation. So there's a lot of accidents with crop dusting pilots because of how fast and low to the ground you have to fly. So there's a lot of benefits. So Pyka decided, like, hell, let's try making our own crop dusters. So they came out with the Pyka Pelican. This is a 38-foot wingspan aircraft that's fully autonomous and electric. It can carry roughly 84 gallons of liquid. That's like 700 pounds of useful load. And it can fly for 30 minutes. The vehicle is fully autonomous, so mission planning, landing, takeoffs, all of that is done autonomously. And it requires a crew of 2 people to operate. All the software was developed in-house, and most of the electronics of the aircraft were developed in-house as well. The fuselage is made of carbon fiber. And as of right now, we have 7 of these airplanes. We actually did the first flight of serial number 7 on Tuesday of this week. And there are 3 airframes that are deployed, 2 of them in Costa Rica, and 1 of them recently got deployed in Brazil, where we're starting work with Embraer on just testing to see pretty much if this airplane works for what they're doing down there. And the first flight with the Brazil airframe was in Thursday of last week. So pretty exciting. So now that you know what the company does, I'm going to give you a little bit of information about my role. So like I said, it's a company of roughly 25 people. I work as a flight test engineer, but due to the size of the company, that pretty means that I do a little bit of everything. I do things ranging from fleet maintenance to flight testing to operator training to aircraft bring up. So so I do a little bit of everything. It's been pretty fun. So I'll just run you through a couple of the things that I do like on a day-to-day. Pyka has a philosophy of doing very fast prototyping and frequent flight testing. So that means that we're pretty much flying 3 days out of every week. So it keeps things exciting, and we can go from initial conception of an idea to actual flight testing within a week. So it's very fast prototyping, so definitely keeps things exciting. Day in the life of flight testing. One of the main things we do is do regression testing. So just to make sure you guys can see the animations, right? Yeah. Okay, sweet. No, one of these stuff. Okay, now they're working. So regression testing pretty much means we're changing software on a daily basis. So we want to make sure that the basic functionality of the airplane still works. So that means that we can still take off and land. We can still spray. We can still do obstacle avoidance. And we also run through the emergency procedures to make sure that everything still works as expected. So this is half of what we do every week. Then we also do a lot of spray pattern tests. So when you're crop dusting, you need to make sure that you have certain droplet size and distribution. So a lot of what we do is do test runs in which we spray over a line that has water sensitive paper. And then we make sure that the distribution and droplet size of our spray system is what we expect. And this has to be tuned for different types of crops. So the video on the left is a series of tests we were doing at our test site in Winters, California. And the one on the right is when we were doing the calibration for the spray system on our aircraft that's in Costa Rica currently. So other things that we do, The airplane has active obstacle avoidance with a LiDAR. So we have to make sure, as part of the regression testing, that this still works as expected. So in the case of this video, you can see there's a styrofoam obstacle in the middle of the field that's directly in front of the airplane's trajectory. And we need to make sure that without us telling the airplane that the obstacle is there, if it's still going to be able to detect it and avoid. So you can see from this video that it actually was able to detect it. We also do a lot of new features are often rolled out, and we need to make sure that they work as expected. So for example, in this one, we were doing a LiDAR alignment run. So the airplane has a 3D map that it uses as reference of pretty much where it's in space and where the obstacles are. But we usually used to use a DJI drone for that, and it was very inefficient and expensive. So we decided to move to making the maps with our own airplane. And one of the things we had to do is make sure that the LiDAR mounting offset was known. So these kind of like, how can I explain? The airplane is kind of like running in a helicoidal or like in a helix path. And by doing that motion, we can determine the offset in the mounting of the LiDAR. So this helps us when we're making our own maps. And then we often roll out other features for example, for like improving the pilot aids. So we recently rolled out cruise control, which helps the pilot keep velocity while he's flying manually in case of an emergency, and a bunch of other stuff. So this is another of the big things we often test. And then the last big thing that I usually do is aircraft bring up, which is as soon as an airplane is like fully manufactured, I'm the one responsible for testing all the systems and make sure that it works as expected. So I'm the one who's flashing new firmware, making sure that the propulsion system is working. So that's the example in the picture here on the left. It's we have to do run-up tests, and pretty much it's just running through 2 full sets of batteries on the ground and make sure that the propulsion behaves as expected. So we tie it down to the back of the truck and just pretty much run it at full throttle for 30 minutes at a time. Just kind of fun. And the one on the right is the deployment of the aircraft. So whenever we move to a new field, we have to train operators. We need to make the new maps. We need to calibrate the spray system, make sure that the missions for that field are as expected. So this picture on the right is an example of when we did that in Costa Rica. And you can see the air tractor and the spraying helicopters are operating in the same field that we are, which is pretty cool seeing them in action. So yeah, that's a little bit about what I do at Pyka. So yeah, I guess the big question is, how did I get here? After all, the whole point of this presentation is to share how I went about getting experience and looking for a job as an international student. So it all really started in my sophomore year of college. I had worked for student groups and picking up experience here and there, but nothing too big. So the first big project I actually had was a thing called an undergraduate research opportunity for Europe. And that was pretty much just the university would provide funds to undergraduates, like $500, to pick a research topic that you wanted and then pursue that for like 6 months. And that was based on the recommendation from, I think, my roommate. He said that I should try it out. So I started out with that, and I found Dr. Demos Gabriel Xavier. I'll refer to him as Demos for simplicity. But Demos pretty much took me in. He gave me a bunch of research projects I could work on, and I picked up one that involved making kind of like the algorithm for attitude determination using sun sensors. So for a small CubeSat. So this is this kind of like weird contraption on the right. So I worked on that for 6 months, and it worked out fairly well. But he kind of provided, kind of like opened the door for future work with him. And pretty much after that, I started doing odd jobs for him. I worked on some work as an assistant for his graduate students on characterizing GPS antennas, and I did that for like 1.5 years. I also made an emulator for the university's UAV lab, just to kind of like simulate the way their microcontroller in their airplane worked. So I did that for a bit as well. But the biggest project that I did with Demos was working in the UMN Small Satellite Research Group, and that's the two CubeSats that NASA was talking about, Exact and Socrates. So it all kind of started. He gave me a position as the HASP, which is the High Altitude Student Payload. It's pretty much this just like giant balloon that flies up to, I think it's like 100,000 feet and stays in there for, I think it's like upwards of 18 hours. So it provides like a near space-like environment for students and groups to test out equipment. So I was the leader that acted as a like systems engineer responsible for kind of like making an engineering unit or a prototype of the CubeSat that he wanted to fly. And we would test it in this platform. So we did this in 2017 and 2018. We would drive down to Palestine, Texas, and work at, I think it's the Columbia Scientific Balloon Facility. There's like a NASA base that is now under Northrop Grumman. But we would work there, we would do the integration, and then we would do the balloon flight. And we would test the engineering unit there. So I started out with that, but then eventually around that same time, he offered me an opportunity to work as the co-leader for the command data handling team, where we would build the flight software for the satellite from scratch. So to be clear, at this point, I had no prior programming experience. I had only taken the requirements in C++ for my major in my freshman year. And pretty much I got kind of like thrown under the bus to some extent. And he was like, "Oh, you're now the software leader." I'm like, "Oh God, okay." So this was kind of fun. And I learned a lot in the process. And it's kind of like what set me in the path that I am today. But yeah, so pretty much worked on that for 2.5 years. The culmination of the project was the Socrates CubeSat that launched from the ISS in February of 2020. And then after that, I went on to grad school. So once I moved to Georgia Tech, I joined the Space Systems Design Lab, and I worked under Dr. Lightsey. So like NASA mentioned, I did a lot of work with the OpenLSD UHF radio, which is pretty much this like open source radio that Planet Labs did way back when. And they just put the blueprints to how to make the board and the software. They made it open source for anybody who wanted to do it. And it works pretty well, but they used like their proprietary like protocols, which is kind of incompatible with a lot of things. So the whole project revolved around the idea of like, can we take this open source radio that we know has flown in space and make it compatible with amateur radio, which has like ground stations scattered all over the world. So yeah, the question was that. The answer was like yes, with some caveats, but it worked. It flew on GT1 as far as I am aware, and it ended up with a journal publication, which was pretty cool. This project, so the project was pretty fun, and this also gave me kind of a lot of experience in like more embedded systems programming, which then became more applicable when I went on and moved on to Pyka. And in addition to working with Lightsey, I also held a bunch of teaching assistantship positions, which there's a chance that some of you may know me because of some of the TA positions I held at Georgia Tech. But yeah, I taught things ranging from aerodynamics, dynamics and controls laboratory. I did space flight operations, and I also did was a TA for a graduate course in the McKee department for the Introduction to Mechatronics, which is a really cool class, and I would definitely recommend if you like programming and just kind of like tinkering with things. But why am I telling you all this? Like, why do you guys need to know about everything I did in college? So I guess I just wanted to highlight the importance of having extracurricular activities in your resume as an international student especially. And I'll expand on this later, and I'll use the experiences I showed you as examples. But the big thing I kind of want to like put out there is like you take this with a grain of salt. Like I said, what worked for me may not work for you, but I do think that a lot of the things I'll talk about are still good practice in general. So yeah. Okay, so as most of you may know, there's a fundamental roadblock that we will face as international students in the aerospace industry, and it's just like export control is an unfortunate reality, and we just have to deal with it. There's not really that much you can do. So this will limit the amount of direct experience that we'll be able to get in the field, and the research and internship opportunities would definitely be limited. But this is not the end of the world. Just because you cannot directly work on aerospace doesn't mean you can't get experience that will be applicable to the field. So knowing this, I kind of took the philosophy of like, okay, I'm gonna make myself too good of a candidate for a company to just like not consider in a job application. And I also focused on developing universal skills, which I'll expand on that later. And yeah, so that being said, when you're developing all this skill set, make sure that you don't corner yourself with like a very niche skill set that is only applicable for the aerospace industry. You want to make sure that you have options outside of the field as a backup plan. But what are universal skills? So I guess the approach that I took was I'm going to get all the skills that I can that are interchangeable between fields. So a good example would be like programming. You can do a lot of programming for like flight software, but at the same time you could do programming for just like any startup. Like if you know C++, you can like use C++ in various applications. So the examples I have for technical universal skills would be programming outside of MATLAB. I know MATLAB is very big in aerospace, but it's very useful to actually know other more, see, how can I say this without throwing shade? More like programming languages, if that makes sense. But yeah, so examples are like C, C++, Python are very useful skills to have. And outside of programming, you could do CAD, just kind of like know how to model things, how to prototype, know how to use a 3D printer, laser cutting, just like basic manufacturing skills, basic circuitry, just like know how to do breadboards, soldering, making PCBs. All these skills, if you're not able to find an aerospace job, you at least are going to be able to be a very good candidate for non-aerospace jobs, for example, as a mechanical engineer. So yeah, in my case, I focused on mechatronics and software engineering. And then my backup plan was pretty much if I can't find an aerospace engineering job, I will at least try to find software engineering jobs. And like I said, try to avoid picking up skills that are too specific to a branch of aerospace. For example, something like orbital mechanics might be narrowing down too much your options. But there's also an argument to be made that even though if you specialize in something like that, you're going to be picking up universal skills along the way. In the case of orbital mechanics, you would be picking up optimization skills and most likely a lot of programming skills too. And these universal skills can also be broader. It doesn't really have to be physical skills. It can be things like leadership, time management, technical documentation, and it can also involve like knowledge of academic topics. So, for example, linear algebra, controls, optimization, etc. So, what are good ways to pick up universal skills? You might find yourself in kind of like a weird loop of I cannot find internships or jobs because I have no experience, but I have no experience because I cannot find internships or jobs, which can be kind of frustrating. So the way I kind of like broke out of that loop was starting out with student groups. At least where I did my undergrad, they had the philosophy of they cannot not accept you in a student group. Like they always have to take you in and they'll give you something to do. So that's a good starting point. At least, for example, where I did my undergrad, there were really good student groups like the solar vehicle team, the rocket team, there's the AIAA, Design, Build, and Fly, Formula SAE. There's a bunch of stuff that like will give you a lot of very hard skills and will also look very good on your resume. So I would definitely put a focus on that. And also this opens up a lot of opportunities for leadership positions. You can also focus a lot on personal projects and hobbies. I personally struggle a lot to learn new skills unless I absolutely have to. So I don't know if this is like the best approach, but something I would often do is purposely take up projects that would force me to learn a new skill. For example, like what I mentioned with being the CDH co-lead with demos, I definitely did not know anything about programming, but I really wanted to be someone who knew programming. So I just kind of like took a Hail Mary and accepted the position. It can backfire, but it also definitely helps you learn a lot of new skills. So that's a lot of what I did. And once you like pick up skills through student groups and personal projects, there's going to be a lot of opportunities that are going to open up through research. So if you can't find an internship, that's not the end of the world. You can spend your summers doing research. And that's kind of what I did on my undergrad. So start reaching out to professors and just see what type of opportunities exist out there. Because this can definitely give you all the same skills that you would get on an internship, just in a different environment. And it has the added benefit that if you eventually want to apply to grad school, research opportunities and research experience actually look pretty good on a grad school application. Teaching assistantships are also a very good way of picking up teaching experience, getting more knowledge about a particular topic, and you can definitely learn a lot from explaining things to someone else. And you also can get pretty good at conflict resolution. So a lot of those skills will give you the more like or like broader skills that I was talking about. And you can also expand on class projects. One thing I did was the mechatronics course that I took. I really enjoyed one of the like final projects we had, and then just that spiraled into a personal project of mine. It's a good way of just kind of like keep on exploring things. So if there's something you really liked in a class that you did for like simulation, just try to expand on that simulation, make something more fun. So you pretty much just want to make sure that at like the end of everything, or like at the end of your undergrad or your grad school program, you're gonna have more skills that you can fit in your resume and more experiences that you can fit on your resume. And you want to get to a point in which like when you're thinking for answers to interview questions, you have like way too much to pick from. So like you never want to be in a situation in which like you don't have enough experience or enough like anecdotes to be able to use. I don't know if that makes sense. I hope it did. So okay, another thing, the importance of a good mentor. It goes without saying that I wouldn't be in the position I am today if it wasn't for Demos. He went above and beyond as a mentor, and he definitely provided a lot of opportunities that would have not shown up otherwise. So I would definitely recommend finding a mentor if you can, or a good advisor. This can be both in like your undergrad or your grad school experience. But be aware that like an advisor can make you or break you. If you have a bad advisor, then you might end up in situations, you might not, for example, you might end up not pursuing paths that you would have liked otherwise. So it is very important to find someone you feel good about. I've heard a lot of people refer to mentors as getting married, just because it's a partnership that should be beneficial for both parties. They're gonna get work out of you, and you should be able to get experience and networking out of them. So your mentor will be a gateway for networking, recommendation letters, and research opportunities. They have coworkers in different universities. They're gonna have past students that work in companies that might be a good fit for you in the future. So it is definitely very useful to have one. They will also offer a lot of career advice and can help you with the job hunting process in graduate school search. In my case, Demos actually knew Lightsey before from I think his grad school, so he was able to provide like a personalized recommendation letter when I was applying to grad school that like was directly addressed to him. So it can be useful to have like this network as a result of a mentor. So yeah, and then for international students, a good mentor can actually find ways of getting you to work in aerospace related projects while still following export control. It might not be the prettiest way, but for example, the project I did with Lightsey was technically part of GT1. I was not part of the GT1 group of students that was working on the satellite, but I was still technically working on the satellite. And the reason that was possible is because like Lightsey realized that the radio they were using was open source, which means that doesn't fall under export control, which means that I could work on it. So they'll be able to find ways of getting you to work on projects. It might be not the most like, glamorous way of working on a satellite, but it's something. So yeah, definitely good mentor can help you out in landing like aerospace related experience. Let's see. So with that out of the way, now that we talked about how to develop a skill set, here are like tips and tricks that I found useful for job hunting. And like I said, this was the method that I used. There's a lot of things that might not make a lot of sense, but I don't know. Somehow it worked. So, one thing that I'm sure you have heard in the past is like, don't make the same cover letter for every company, and don't make the same resume for every company. So, they should be personalized for the position you're applying to. One thing that I found very useful is making cover letter and resume banks. So pretty much the idea that I had behind this is that like, I'm not gonna have a template for a cover letter in which I just kind of like insert name here of the company and stuff like that, because it might sound too generic. But I still didn't have the time to like make a new cover letter from scratch for every position that I was applying to. So what I did was I would have a basic structure for my cover letters. So it'd be kind of like an introduction of like what skills I thought were useful for the position I was applying to. And then I would have 3 different paragraphs describing kind of like the specifics of each particular skill. And then like a generic conclusion. So by splitting it in that way, I could actually make a bank of like pre-written paragraphs for each skill set that I had. So if I was applying for something that required like programming skills and leadership skills, I would have a like pre-written leadership skill paragraph and programming skill paragraph. And I could just kind of like pick and choose the ones that I wanted for my cover letters. It definitely helped the job application process. It made it like way faster. I would still have to like change things here and there to make it more applicable to the position that I was applying to, but I found it to be pretty helpful. So yeah, make a cover letter bank and a resume bank. Make sure that you kind of like include the skills that are relevant for the position you're applying to on your resume. So I mentioned make a list of all the types of positions you may be applying to. So in my case, I knew I was going to be doing flight test engineer, software engineer, mechatronics engineer, and then just pretty much I would go into all like the skill sets that I think someone in that position might need, and then based on those skill sets, I would make those paragraphs I was talking about. Let's see. Another big thing: make sure that your application or like your cover letters use the keywords that they include in the job application, just because it's gonna make it stand out a little bit more if they see exactly what they're asking for in your cover letters. Another thing is you should probably go the extra mile. Job hunting is essentially you're selling yourself to a company. Like you are a product and you want to convince the company that they want you. So it may take a lot of work, but there's a lot of things that you can do to actually stand out from the crowd. And if you're an international student, you have to work extra hard to actually stand out from the crowd. So a few things you can do is you can make a website. There's very easy ways you can make websites now without really knowing how to do it, like programming. So that's something you could do. So make kind of like your resume and all your experiences be like listed somewhere. You can beef up your LinkedIn page and like make it extremely detailed. You can make a portfolio, which is one of the things I did, and I'm going to go into more detail about it in the next slide. You can put a lot of love on your take-home interviews. So, for example, when I was applying for Pyka, one of the projects they wanted us to do had something to do with their path planner and obstacle avoidance. So you could do it one of 2 ways. Like you could have just submitted the answer to the question, or you could have kind of like gone the extra mile and visualized what they were talking about. So I created like the solution for the like the prompt that they gave me, and on top of that, I added a MATLAB script that would just kind of like draw out all the things that they wanted me to solve for. So just kind of like showing that you care about the position and that you're kind of like passionate about what you're doing definitely gives a good impression on the people who are trying to hire you. And like after I got hired, I talked with my manager, and he like did mention that stuff like that actually made me stand out from the crowd. So definitely stuff like that helps out. If they make you like give an explanation of how you would approach a problem, like how you would solve a problem, make like a very detailed solution and like organized and include diagrams. And, yeah, again, I don't know if that made sense, but I hope it did. And then another thing, if you're doing, for example, software work, you can do open source projects in GitHub, like just showcase your code. So yeah, you just want to make sure that you definitely stand out from the crowd. So, like I mentioned, the approach I took, or one of the many things I did, was making a portfolio, which was just a like visual guide to my resume, in which I would go into more detail into each of the experiences that I listed. And my approach was that if I had an interview, I would have this printed out with me and I would hand it out to the interviewer. So that way, when I'm talking about a particular experience, you would have like a visual idea of the project I was talking about. So I have my Europe wooden cube thing. So whenever I was talking about the sun sensor project, I could show him the like way I tested it out. I had the 2 satellites that I worked on, and I highlighted every single system and where that fell in the stack that I worked on. So just kind of like a bunch of stuff like this kind of like gives a better impression, or like makes you stand out from the crowd. Like think of the people the person who is interviewing you. He's gonna be talking to like 5 other people, but definitely like if only 1 out of those 5 brought like visual aids for the presentation, he's definitely gonna remember that more. I hope what I'm saying makes sense. But yeah, so I did that. Now, my take to job hunting. I kind of like did a tiered approach. I was too stubborn to refuse, or like too stubborn to not apply to aerospace jobs. So what I did was kind of like set up a timeline, and I gave myself, I think it's like 5 months before I was really up against the wall and actually had to find a position because of OPT. So what I did was, okay, my first month and a half, I'm going to be very picky, and I'm only going to apply to my dream job that I feel very passionate about. And I was even going to like reach even higher and apply for positions that I was underqualified for within a realistic sense. So like don't apply for something that requires a PhD if you only have an undergrad, but you could apply to something that says like 3+ years of experience in programming. You can sell your research experience and internship experience as being like 2 years of programming experience. So yeah, you can kind of like stretch it out a bit. So in the end, the job postings are kind of like a wish list from the people who are looking for to hire someone. So there's not gonna be someone who actually meets every single thing. So don't be sorry. Don't feel bad if you see job postings and you don't fit the exact profile. If you feel like 5 out of the 10 things that they're listing, you can still apply. So okay, that was the top tier of the thing I was doing, and I would apply to all those like dream jobs. And if after that first month I didn't start hearing anything back from there, I would lower my standards, and I'll be like, okay, I'll actually start applying to positions that I am qualified for. And I would maybe explore other areas within aerospace. So, okay, if I can't find positions in the space sector, I'm going to start looking for positions in the aeronautical sector. And then I gave myself like another month of if I don't find that, well, I'm going to start using my universal skills. And I'm going to start applying for jobs outside of aerospace. So I started applying for jobs in the mechanical engineering world or software engineering world. And then I kind of reached the third tiered approach, or the third tier of my approach by the time I got a job. But my, like, if all else fails plan was you can go with job recruiters. So if you're absolutely not finding any positions that you can apply to, or just don't hear back from anyone, you can start going to companies that specialize in looking for jobs that you can apply to. The only caveat about these companies is that you're going to be a contractor most of the time, and that means that the company is going to take a percentage of your paycheck. But you still find a job, and it's a good way of still being inside the kind of like aerospace world. So yeah, at least in my case, this was like a very worst case scenario, but they're very good at getting back to you. Okay, and the thing about the like third tier of the approach is that if you start applying for jobs outside of aerospace, make sure that you still have a direct path back into aerospace. So one of the positions I was interviewing for, other than the Pyka one, was a position for MathWorks. So you could if you look at the position, you could say like, okay, MathWorks is the tool that gets used in a lot of aerospace. So I can maybe make a network with people that work in aerospace, and once you actually find a work visa or a green card, you can eventually make your way back into aerospace. So just kind of like try to be smart about it. Don't like end up finding a, I don't know, a mechanical engineering job in something that's completely not related to aerospace and then just completely close out yourself from ever coming back into the industry. Okay, and then how to search for job openings. One thing about what I was saying about the tiered approach. Applying for positions you're underqualified for. The position I got at Pyka required 3+ years of experience in software, and I was still able to get the position. So that I hope that serves as an example of like, yes, there's still chances of you getting hired if you're applying for these far-reaching into these positions. So how to search for job openings? I personally use LinkedIn the most, but I also use Indeed and just company websites in general. My approach with company websites would just become like list all the companies that I know do aerospace work and then just go into their websites and see if they had a job position. If they don't have job openings, don't make this be like the end of your search with that company. Most of them have the opportunity of putting job alerts. So if like something with the keywords like software engineer shows up, you get emails for that. And that's actually how I found my position at Pyka. When I first discovered them, they didn't have any open positions. I put the job alert, and within I think like 2 weeks, I got a notification that they had posted something. So those are definitely useful. Try reaching out to your advisors or mentors, and they might actually put you in contact with former students. For example, I reached out to Lightsy, and he put me in contact with some students that were working in startups in the Bay Area. You could try reaching out to former classmates, roommates, friends of friends. I reached out to the master's students that I worked with when I was in my undergrad. I reached out to my freshman year roommate that works at Boeing. I reached out, I don't know, I sent out a lot of emails. It's going to be frustrating. It's going to take a lot of time, but just try. You don't lose anything. The worst that they can do if you send out an email is that they don't reply. So there's nothing to lose in that sense. And another thing when looking for jobs is I would recommend going for smaller companies than bigger companies. I know that it's very appealing to say like, oh, I want to work for Boeing, but like Boeing is most likely not gonna hire international students versus a small startup that has like 20 people. Like they are in desperate need for hiring qualified individuals. So if an international student shows up and they're like their dream applicant, then they're gonna do their best to actually take them in. For example, Planet does that, right? Or Planet Labs. They specifically like choose not to not hire international students. If that makes sense. So yeah, they pretty much like they don't use that as a deal breaker. And in the case of Pyka does the same. If someone is an international student, they'll still hire them based on their skills, and then they'll go through getting the expert license for you to be able to work. So I feel that startups have a larger chance of giving you the opportunity than bigger, like well-established companies. And I guess the other thing is you have to treat job hunting as a full-time job. Make yourself a goal of applying to like 5+ companies in a week. I heard a professor in my undergrad said that you should be applying to like 10 or 20 companies in a week. But I feel like realistically, with the amount of work that most of you will be having it around the same time, you won't be able to do that. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't have a goal of how many you should be applying to. Okay, preparing for interviews. The way I did it is I kind of did a resume cover letter bank approach, but with interview questions. I would just go on Google and be like, oh, what are the 30 most commonly asked interview questions? And a lot of them are like very generic. It's like, oh, tell me about yourself, or like, tell me about a time you failed. But they help you, like preparing answers for those questions actually help you kind of like loosen up and get a good idea of how to answer interview questions. So I just made a list of all those questions and all my answers for that. I would make sure that I would never use the same example twice to answer a question, just to kind of like make sure that you're not always alluding back to the same thing. You want to show that you have a variety in experiences. You should be ready to talk about your biggest weaknesses and greatest strengths. Make sure that when you talk about your weaknesses, you don't, it's going to sound bad, but you don't actually say your biggest weaknesses. So I don't know. Like if they ask you what's your biggest weakness and you say, "Oh, I'm lazy," then it's like, dude, no. But you could say like, okay, one of my biggest weaknesses is that I care too much about my job, and I always want to do a very good job, and that ends up taking way more time than I expect. So like, make sure that you're still making yourself look good, even though you're talking about things you're bad at. Um, so yeah, so just when you're preparing for that. When you prepare answers for times that you have failed, don't be afraid of saying that you've messed up, but make sure that you like explicitly say what you learned from the way you messed up. Because if you just finish your answer with like, oh, yep, I messed up, then that once again, that's not going to look good on you. Um, Another big thing is when you're answering all your interview questions, think of the acronym CAR. So it's context, action, and results. So you pretty much, when they ask you a question, for example, tell me about a time you failed. You're going to say like, oh, I used to work for this project that's making a satellite that does this and this thing. And while we were testing this thing, I don't know, this chip burnt out. So my action was that I did X and X to fix the chip. And then the results, that's that the satellite was able to launch successfully 2 weeks after that. So just don't answer a question without providing any context, and don't just say what you did. Say the results, or like explain how what you did ended up working out. I don't know if that makes sense. Also, make sure your answer does not exceed 2 minutes. 2 minutes, just because if you go on, they won't be able to ask you multiple questions. And another big one is make sure you research the company that you're applying for or you're interviewing for, and that you have like non-generic questions to ask them at the end, just to kind of like show that you actually put some time into preparing for the interview. And okay, the last thing would be during your interview. Don't be afraid of showing your excitement for the position. One of the positive feedback that I got out of my interview for Pyka was that like they could definitely tell that I was very excited about what I would be doing, and that kind of like helped them pick me over maybe more experienced people that were interviewing. Make sure that you emphasize what you've done in an experience that you're talking about. I know that it feels weird, kind of like only talking about yourself, and that you're most likely going to try to be humble, but make sure that you're using I instead of we in the points that matter. So if you're talking about like your experience as the co-lead of a satellite, you don't want to say like, oh, we developed this part of the code. Like you want to make sure that you explain the parts that you did, because in the end, that's kind of what they're trying to figure out. A big one is that it's 100% okay to say that you don't know the answer to the question, but make sure that if you say that you don't know the answer, you explain what you would do to actually find the answer to the question. So if they ask you about, I don't know, some like very obscure thing about coding, you're like, I don't really know that, but it reminds me of this thing, and if it's that thing, then it reminds, I could use this approach to actually find an answer. Like they really want to see your thought process. So it's okay if every now and then you don't know the answer to a question. You just have to show that, like, in a real case scenario, you would not just like sit there and accept your fate. You would actually like do your best to find a solution. Also, make sure that you just don't reply to everything they ask you with "I don't know," because that also looks bad. But yeah, so every now and then saying you don't know, it's good. And to some extent, you're also interviewing them. Like in the end, you're trying to figure out whether you want to work for this company or not. So make sure that you still ask some questions that are important to you. For example, like what's the work culture? Are you working 80-hour weeks or are you working 40-hour weeks? You could ask the interviewer about his or her favorite part about the company. Just to kind of like you also get a good sense of like what you're signing up for. Because there's a very big chance that like what's shown in the website or in the job posting is not necessarily what you're going to be getting. So I think it's worthwhile making sure that you interview them to some extent. But yeah, that is pretty much all I got. I hope I didn't ramble for too long, and that at least some of the things I said were useful. You guys have any questions for me?
I have a question.
Okay, I can barely hear you though.
Okay, so the question is like, in this specific like area of like flight attendants, like it seems like your experience was like almost in something health, you're able to get into this. How do you kind of correlate that, what you did with Lightsea, kind of now this flight dynamics controls is actually the area that I'm also interested in as well. And I see that there's not the same, like, doesn't have as many opens or any other, like, well.
I could get only like half of the audio. Is there a mic you guys can pass around?
Yeah, so the mic is here. We can just repeat the question for you.
Okay.
The question was basically so you applied to like a position that was very different from your research and like project experience.
Mhm.
So how did you relate that very different experience in like almost like semi-different field to the position that you were applying to?
Yeah. So the position I have at Pyka, I am kind of like the interface between the flight test team and the software team. So there is a very big software component in it. So in the actual job posting, it wasn't too far away from what I had done in the past. The only thing I would do is instead of saying like I did these type of things for a satellite, I would say like I have this rough experience in programming. So, for example, they would ask me questions about like how you would go about debugging a system where you don't have a lot of information, and then you can use I use my previous experiences in satellites to say like, okay, for example, when I was working with Lightsails project and there was like this very obscure thing I had to debug, this was the procedure that I would use and these would be the tools I would use. So yeah, I guess in this case, like it may sound that the position is not too directly related with what I did in my undergrad, but there were a lot of things that actually overlapped quite a bit.
The second question I have is it okay if we reach out to you, like, outside of this, like, question like that? Do you have any other questions?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, is it okay if like students reach out to you outside of like this presentation to ask any questions or maybe for some guidance and stuff? Okay. Yeah, is it like email?
I think
I don't think it's email.
okay, we can share your email with them if you want.
Yeah, there's also a very big chance that my email should be in the SSDL website, in the alumni page.
Okay, yeah. Go to our lab's website and there's an alumni column and you can find Ricardo throughout May 20. Funny because he added that. He was one of the people working on that. So he added his own kind of information. If you like, you can type your email in the chat. And actually just like put it there so you can see that. But type your email to that question recording and then.
Yeah, just leave it open.
Oh, would you like? No, I don't think you heard me now. Could you ask him to just type his email in the chat?
Oh yeah, I didn't realize he couldn't hear you. Sorry. We were just wondering if you could just type your email in the chat so that people here can see it.
Give me a second.
Yeah.
It's weird. The sound.
Yeah, I forget. You were like talking. I was like, yeah. Cool.
Also, if you have any internship positions, maybe you want to take some of the students from here.
Did you hear?
Yeah, I feel like you already know.
Yeah, so NASA was asking if you have any open internship positions, please send us.
We all love planes.
Yeah.
I mean, we are actually hiring right now, but definitely not for internships.
Oh.
Well.
If you like to email him, tell like you attended his talk, and that'd be good way to connect with him.
Yeah.
Except stand out from other people.
Yeah.
We have a question from the people who are SVP to the event. And the question is, what's the most difficult choices you had to make as an international student living in the U.S.?
Oh boy. I think like one of the biggest ones. Let's see. I think the biggest one would be like, when do you stop looking for a job in aerospace? And it sounds kind of bad, but it's like when you should start giving up on what you've always been working for. Um, and like reaching that point is kind of very frustrating. I know that it comes from a weird position because I ended up actually finding a job in aerospace, but there was a point during my job hunting which I had to just take a step back and be like, I actually need to just find a job. And that's when I started applying for positions in MathWorks. I started applying for just normal software engineering positions that had nothing to do with space or airplanes. And so I think that's most likely one of the like toughest choices that I had to make.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for giving us the presentation. It was very informative. I personally found a lot of points where I could relate to just from the experience that I had. Yeah, so thank you so much for attending it. We really appreciate your time and have a good weekend.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was very nice talking to you guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Ricardo.
Oh,
Oh, you left? All right, I'll text him.